What's the worst thing you've had or seen done by someone who was supposed to be a professional? My wife went to a professional conference out of town when she was 7 months pregnant with our first child. It was about a 4-hour drive from home and she was a little concerned, so she asked me to go with her. She didn't consult with her OB-GYN. While we were there, her water broke. We went to the local hospital and they said she was going to be bedridden for the next several weeks. So unless we wanted to stay there, we should get in the car and drive like heck back to our hometown. When we got home, we went directly to the hospital and they admitted her. They kept her in a bed with her feet higher than her head and checked her several times a day for infections. Her OB-GYN was nowhere to be found. My wife was an RN at the same hospital where she was staying. Her friends, other RNs, would come by and chat with her frequently. They let her know that the OB-GYN was mad at her for leaving town without telling him and bitching to everyone in the hospital about her. After she'd been there for a couple weeks, the OB-GYN showed up. I was in the room, along with several of her friends. He smelled strongly of alcohol. He walked up to the bed without saying anything while pulling on a glove. He pulled up her gown and jammed his hand in while everyone was standing there. He then made a few incomprehensible sounds and stormed out. We didn't see him again for a couple weeks. The tests for infection finally came back positive, so they were going to induce labor. Her OB-GYN showed up, and even though the staff doctor said she could deliver normally, her doctor insisted she needed a cesarean section. My wife was really disappointed, but we went along with what he said. We later found out he wanted her to have a cesarean because he had a tea time that afternoon and didn't want to miss it. I wanted to complain, but he was the head of obstetrics at the hospital and my wife was there would be repercussions to her job if we did. When I was a teenager, I ended up having to have my first root canal at a new dentist because my father had switched insurance plans. Everything started out normal, but after about an hour into the procedure, the dentist told me that she needed to step out for a moment. At that moment, I still had one of those metal filing toothpicks stuck up into my tooth, so she told me not to close my mouth. I sat there and kept it open for over a freaking hour. Apparently she had gone off to do a procedure on another patient because my root canal had run over the time she had allotted for it. Surprise, surprise. My tooth had somehow become infected in this time and I had to wear a temporary crown for a week and not eat anything that wasn't room temperature while I took antibiotics. When I finally got the permanent crown, it ended up being the brightest shade of white that they had. I still haven't been able to get my other teeth to match it without professional whitening. It should be mentioned that this lovely dentist was Uli Tates, the lawyer dentist who later went on to become the head of the Obama birther movement. I was a little surprised when I saw her on CNN a few years back. Horrible dentist, horrible lawyer, horrible human being. An electrician touching exposed wiring to see if it was on. I should also mention that he had only 3 fingers left on that hand. I once saw a professional fire dancer use a fire whip and accidentally set his own hair on fire. He proceeded to flip the frick out. Having known too many fire performers, lighting yourself on fire has happened to everyone. Normally you're not a dumbass about it and just put it out and keep going. This story is why I always wore a hat. I only ever managed to burn the longest parts of my hair and my winter hat smells deliciously of Kiro. My husband worked with a cook that was nasty, looked dirty, drank during work hours and ate all the jamon iberico, 50-60 year kg. He claimed to have owned a restaurant before. One day my husband went into the kitchen just in time to stop this guy pressing the start button on the microwave with a huge metal tray inside. When my husband started yelling at him, the guy asked how was he supposed to know you can't put metal inside a microwave oven. I can't do verbs. Just because they owned a restaurant doesn't mean it was successful or good. Owner of a company that I worked for kept a small stack of bumper stickers with very permanent adhesive in his glove box. You know, just in case someone cut him off while driving. He would follow them for a few minutes and if they stopped we would lurk in the work truck and apply said bumper sticker. It was bright pink and stated I would rather be riding my corn cob. TLDR. Cut off my boss while in his work truck. Get free bumper sticker. That sounds pretty dang professional to me. One of my history teachers in high school was a complete douche. He looked like the villain in Air Bud. Red hair, Charlie Brown bulb of hair in the front with a mustache. He had done things like try to rip my papers apart when I stapled the wrong two together, ripped one in half and made me tape it back together. Completely hated the guy. One day he brought his daughter to school and she wasn't acting the way he wanted. He locked her butt in the closet in the classroom. The entire school heard about it. When I was around 14-15 we moved to a new apartment and I made a new friend. She was around my age and we hung out all the time. We would walk to the corner store a lot and she would go in the back room for lengths of times as I waited. I always wondered what she would do in the back room, but she would change the subject and I didn't worry too much since she wouldn't get in trouble and she was the only friend I had at the time because it was summer and I had just moved. Later I saw her coming out with a cop. She didn't know I was at the store. When she saw me she told me everything and told me not to tell anyone. Story is she'd been sleeping with this cop for the past 3 months. He works security at the convenience store as a part-time. He was an actual police officer. I stayed quiet but couldn't believe how someone that was there to protect us was sleeping with a 14-15-YO in the back of the store. Also how the owners allowed it and looked the other way. Worst part is he became really good friends with her mom. She never suspected a thing. He used his uniform to earn trust and abuse his power. She was in love with him. I stopped hanging out with her so much and we moved a couple of months later. I was taking courses via distance in order to complete my university degree. One particular class was an economics class. The professor that semester was filling in for the regular prof and had never taught via distance before and was using the regular prof's materials. No big deal. It's really not that hard. So midterms roll around. We write the multiple choice midterm and our proctors mail it back in. Being as there are people across the country, and often in other countries, taking the course, the tests take a while to come back and be graded. Cool. So one day we log into the online courseware and see that our grades are posted, along with a very long and ranty email from the professor. The entire class failed the midterm. She insisted that she double and triple checked the answer key, and it was right, and that she never had such a thing happen before. She also admonished us for not studying hard enough and that we really had to work to pass the final. As you can imagine, there was nothing but uproar amongst the class. No one could believe that not even one person didn't pass the midterm. So we waited for the midterms to be returned to us. Along the way she decided to compromise and offer us a very fair final. Double all midterm marks so they were where they should be and use the better mark between the two for the course grade, as long as the final was passed. Now, it's 3 weeks before the final, and everyone is flipping the frick out to ensure we completely understand the material. Online study groups are created. Questions and discussions abound. Then midterms began arriving back at students' homes. We began posting questions about the answers. Why was X wrong for questioner? The professor gave very lengthy and detailed answers for the first few that had been posted. We were confused. The answers she had given us were to questions that weren't on our midterms. The professor went silent after berating us for being idiots and insisting it wasn't her fault. The professor profusely apologized for inadvertently correcting all the exams using the answer key for a different version of the exam. Best clusterfuck ever. Let me start by saying I've had a peanut nut allergy since infancy. So now, story time. When I was in preschool there was a day that they were serving PB&J sandwiches. Me being the smart little squeaker I was, I called attention to the fact that I can't eat the PB&J because I'm allergic to peanuts. One of the teachers came over to me, grabbed my sandwich, opened it up, and wiped the side with mostly peanut butter against the edge of a table and put it back together and gave it to me. I gave her a dead confused and repulsed stare, followed by a courteous, "Can I have something else please?" The girl there's 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 later. Of course, I told my mother who rose all of heck. I mean seriously, WTF. Not only should my teachers have known my allergies but they should have had the fricking sense to know that even the smallest amount of peanut butter will still in fact cause an allergic reaction. Electrician who claimed he could do network cabling added 3 network points the same way you'd added power sockets, by running a spur from one existing network point. The result, 4 network points in the office. Perfect in every way except that you could only use one at a time. That's actually pretty funny. I'm surprised he even had the equipment to splice wires of such a high gauge. When I was 6 I was sent to a therapist for ADHD. He decided to give me 11 different medications over the course of a few months. They made me appear to be completely insane. My behavior became strange and violent. My parents eventually made me a day patient at the local asylum because they caught me talking to things that weren't there. Thankfully the therapist there got me off the cocktail and told my parents to sue the original therapist. I still remember the nightmares, hallucinations that would blend together. What the frick? After some severe bleeding I went to the ER to see if maybe I had a miscarriage. Up to this point there hadn't been any reason to think I may have been pregnant. The doctor ran a test and came back to tell me, "Congratulations, you are fertile myrtile." And yes, it miscarried. When I was a teen, I went to the ER because I had been bit by a cat. The doctor told me I should take antibiotics and asked me what kind I wanted. To clarify, I'm not a doctor nor was I one at age 13. I told the psych doctor in a mental facility that I had mood swings sometimes but that they were always caused by something and were not random. Then he asked me if I ever saw or heard things. I said, aside from 2 or 3 of those minor unreal images we all have when we are trying to wake up, nothing. That was probably the wrong thing to say, because then he diagnosed me as having schizoaffective disorder. It tore my parents apart and I had to explain to them several times that this guy was full of crap and blowing things out of proportion. Fortunately my next doctor wasn't so quick to rush to judgment. My coworker doesn't know how to transfer calls. She just tells people to hang up and call us again and ask the receptionist for someone else. I have a coworker that does that too, but he looks, on the transfer sheet, to tell them what extension to dial when they call back. I guess that transfer button that is right there on the phone isn't big enough for him. In my defense, myself and our receptionist have already showed him how to transfer. He just forgets. In 4th grade, I hurt my ankle during recess and told my teacher I thought it was broken. I mean my ankle had swelled to the size of an orange. Of course, the teacher dismissed me and had me go to the nurse who said it was just a little sprain. I walked home that day, 8 blocks, with a shattered ankle. When I got home I showed my mom, went to the ER, and had to wear a cast for 8 weeks. Thanks, teach. To clarify, my mom was pretty upset with the nurse, not my teacher, but regardless, my teacher didn't send me to the nurse until after I begged for like 2 hours, even after looking at my ankle. Sounds like when I fell off the monkey bars and broke my wrist in 2nd grade. My teacher said I just bumped it and refused to let me see the nurse. It wasn't until brownies after school when I couldn't hold the scissors to do crafts that someone thought maybe my mom needed to be called. I was subbing for a teacher's aide one time, and she kept pronouncing the word chameleon. The word was chameleon. This was the teacher. I'm not making this up based on what's apparently an episode of Him. This was an actual experience I had while working at an elementary school. She was reading a book to the students about a chameleon searching for friends and changing his color to fit in. My health teacher would pronounce groin as groin, and when we corrected her she just stared over her glasses and said, "Well, that's how it's spelled." I work as a summer rec director for the local school district, so I basically spent my days watching 30 children of various ages run around a playground and get into trouble. Now some of these kids have special needs and in that case may have a aide to help keep an eye on them. One day some boys about 10 found a hornet's nest in the ground and unknown to me decided to poke it with a stick. This peeved the bees off, understandably, so they started to swarm around the area. I realized and started warning the kids to stay away. While I did, a boy named Tim with autism started wandering over oblivious to the problem and my shouts. His aide just stood there and freaking watched him do it. I ran across the park, gobbed him and carried him away, slapping bees the whole time. He got stung 5 times, twice in the face. The aide said she had a phobia of bees and didn't want to get too close. To clear up any confusion, it was a yellow jacket nest to be specific. I'm not sure if they are technically hornets or wasps, but wherein from people commonly refer to them as hornets. When I call them bees I'm quoting the aide who was incorrect. This is part of the reason I don't think she had an actually phobia, but instead, like most people, felt anxious around stinging insects. That and the many other times she was dangerously irresponsible while doing her job. I have nothing against people with legitimate phobias. Whoa, what a C. Way to go below, and well within the call of duty. I applied for an apartment at a nice apartment complex in my town, and several months later I got a phone call about a maxed out credit card I didn't own. As it turns out, the guy who processes credit checks was opening credit cards with the info on rental applications and maxing them out. He was genuinely surprised when he got caught. He had over 50 stolen cards when they arrested him, according to the arresting officer. I've seen a consultant neurologist attempt to bamboozle a newly diagnosed patient onto a drug trial which had leukemia side effects, including several deaths on his previous trial, with the sage words, "Yeah, but they can cure that now." Also thrown into this was a load of used car sales techniques, including writing down remission rates on a piece of paper, then dramatically crossing them out and writing 100% in giant text. I suspected he was going to throw in free rims. A doctor, trying to get his name in the books, at any costs. When working in a salon, this one girl would burn women on purpose with a curling iron if they annoyed her. She didn't last long. Bad attitude won't get you far. Went to the doctor's office to pick up my blood test results. Doctor came into the room shaking his head saying, "Wow, this is not good. Not good at all." I started to panic. He then alerted me about how some baseball player got hurt and his team was doomed. I never thought a doctor would do something like that, eye roll. But for that 30-second span I was convinced I was a dead man walking. Also never went back to that doc again. Mid-1990s Texas. My cousin and I grew up as poor hicks. She had a coupon for a JCPenney haircut, but the nearest store was an hour away in Texarkana, Texas. My poor cousin and I drove an hour and a half for her to get the most fricked up version of a Jennifer Aniston shag. The hairstylist did the entire style pretty much one-handed, since her other hand was preoccupied with eating a large batch of homemade fried chicken drumsticks out of a giant Tupperware container. She ate the entire 30 minutes it took to cut her hair. Not KFC or delicious Popeyes, her own stash. The hairstylist motioned as often with the scissors as she did with the drumstick and kept poking my cousin's scalp with the greasy end of the chicken. She sat there and cried, both of us too timid to say anything, while the stylist continued gesticulating wildly with poultry products. That makes me want to buy your cousin a real haircut. 20 years later. I work as a home health nurse, and the patient I work with primarily is paralyzed from the armpits down due to an injury 22 years ago. I'm training a nurse to work with my patient while I'm gone on vaca. Right off I realize something is way off with this chick and call the office. I hadn't even let her touch my patient because she's that strange. Cops show up to the house that we're at, as well as my office manager and a few other people. This nurse had showed up to work crap-faced and high on narcotics. I collapsed about 15 years ago and woke up in the hospital. The doctor told me that, although the tests were negative, she was sure I had AIDS. As it was a Friday night and tests were not quick and or readily available, I couldn't find out for sure until Monday. So all weekend, I was trying to figure out where I got it from and how long I had to live. I was in my early 20s. When Monday came, a gastroenterologist examined me. It took him a few minutes to tell me I had irritable bowel syndrome, in the form of Crohn's disease, that caused my negative immune response, internal bleeding, etc. I wasn't even HIV positive, I was later told. I was so happy not to be dying, I didn't even think about suing the B doctor that told me I had AIDS that Friday night. I'm a diabetic. I went on a trip out of town with my boyfriend and his family. The second night of the trip I ended up getting very sick with very high blood sugar. There were no hospitals nearby, so we had to go to a clinic. I was vomiting the whole way there, into a bucket. Eventually I was just vomiting water. When I got there I explained to them that I only needed a needle to give myself insulin with. I use an insulin pump, but it wasn't working, which is why I got sick. I had insulin on me, but no needle to use with it, and they didn't let me have one. They tested my blood sugar, which was 19.5 when I last tested it, and said it was 13, so I shouldn't worry too much. I told them that they were wrong and that I was vomiting. I was horribly sick. I was literally begging them for a needle or some form of insulin. Instead, they insisted on testing my blood for hours, literally 4 hours, before I got any insulin. I was in ketoacidosis by the time I got insulin, because of how long I had to wait to get it. The worst part? When the doctor was taking the 4th blood gas test, it's one of the more painful blood tests, I was crying, and he decided to make the worst joke ever. Hey, great, maybe your tears will bring your blood sugar down. Worst experience of my freaking life. I have some very old, tiny white scars on my left wrist that are usually hard for people to see. One of the first things he asked me was, "Oh, so what's with the scars on your wrist?" here in front of my boyfriend and his mom. I was already crying because of all the vomiting I did, and all I could say was they were from a long time ago. I can't believe he was so rude, inconsiderate and, to be blunt, stupid. This sounds so ridiculous that it must sound like I'm lying, but I swear on my life I'm not. I've never been so infuriated with a doctor in my life. As a fellow diabetic, this story made me angry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I hit a really rough patch during 10th grade. Depression from a close death in the family. I had lost a cat. Felt disconnected from my family. Stress from school. I started thinking dark thoughts. My math teacher was the professional one. Talked to me, and we both decided to try talking to the school counselor. He was a man in his 50s, but would request that I visit him alone. I always brought my math teacher with me, because I felt more comfortable having someone aware of the situation with me. He continued to request that I see him alone. It got to the point where it felt like he was disappointed seeing the math teacher follow me into the room. I ended up getting spooked and stopped going, ignored appointments, only to have the math teacher come up and talk me into going with her. He eventually called my parents and let them know of the situation when it became clear I was getting worse. When I still didn't bend to his requests of seeing me alone, he got angry and told my parents I was fricked in the head and needed severe psychotherapy. It still doesn't feel right. 5 years on, and I never got the issues with me fixed. I've been too afraid to speak to someone. Talk with someone. One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch. I'm sorry you're having problems. People are there for you. We held off on hiring the neighborhood lawnmower guy until we needed him to spruce up our front and backyards prior to a barbecue we were throwing. Dude sprayed Roundup over the entire front lawn and it died within a week. That was a couple months ago and the new grass seed is just now starting to sprout. Butchery. Back when I was working in telecom, I knew a sales rep who had it made. He was in with the guy responsible for all of the services at the Board of Trade. His days consisted of dropping by the office for the morning meeting and then spending the day in the arcade. On the day before quota was due, he'd call his guy and have him transfer enough services to make quota in exchange for some Cubs tickets or something. I think this is what he did for a living for a few years. Sadly, not a lot has changed in that industry. Chances are very good that this is how your company has decided on their phone and internet service. I worked with an old man that was 72 but claimed to be 62 so he could get a job. The guy lied about everything and anything regarding his knowledge of the job and would threaten to take the company to court for age discrimination if they tried to fire him. He would yell at anybody that told him he was doing something the wrong way and many times tried to get into fist fights in the office when he felt like he was getting in trouble. This was a shirt and tie job that required a master's degree. Frick that old dude. I was happy when he got fired. When I was growing up, my dad had a trusted mechanic that did all the work on our family cars. The guy was honest, and as a result his shop was pretty successful. By the time I was in my late teens, the shop owner was doing well enough that he stepped back from running the shop's day-to-day operations, undoubtedly enjoying the fruits of building his business. Problem was, the guy he had managing the shop in his place was a little shady. We'd always kind of suspected it, but the kicker came when I had a problem with my car's clutch. I can't recall the specifics, sadly, so we took the car to the shop, and when I stopped by a day or two later, the shop manager talked to me. Well, we've been taking a look at it and we're not quite sure yet, but we're pretty sure it's not a hydraulic problem. The car didn't even have a hydraulic clutch. I guess he didn't know I knew that. I think my dad quit taking our cars to that shop not too long after that. To be fair, he wasn't wrong. Professor here. When I was called into the president's office at the college to work on a project, he started describing it and leaned forward to emphasize a bit on the paperwork. He ripped a giant fart. I looked at him, and he smiled and winked. Bit weird. He was just making sure you knew who was in charge. Donald Trump, George W. Bush, and George Clooney are among the many people known for using this technique. I had a professor, for a lit philosophy class, take points off for using the word plastic incorrectly in the writing. I had used the word to describe something malleable and she thought I meant the material plastic. Our discussion was over email, and I linked her to the dictionary.com definition. I did not receive a good grade in that class. So my immediate manager was a pretty cool dude. Unfortunately, he was the epitome of middle management. He had no real authority, couldn't hire without approval, couldn't fire without approval, raises, big decisions, nobody told him crap until the last minute, so on and so forth. Felt bad for the guy, but he had his niche in the world, coached his son's soccer team and seemed happy enough. I was an hourly employee, so no benefits, PTO, sick leave, none of that crap. If I was there I got paid, if I wasn't, I didn't. There was a classification, HDE, in our whole division for hourly employees, but I was the only one in Mr. Middle Management's section of 20 or so. Well, one day we have a staff meeting. Mr. Middle Management obviously doesn't get to run it, so some bigwig calls all 20 of us into a conference room to discuss new company policies. Great, whatever. After he goes through all of the horror, go team bulls, he just casually tosses out there that the budget for HDE employees has been cut by 30% effective next quarter, and then tells us to have a good day. So here I am in a room full of people, finding out about my 30% pay cut from a guy whom I've never met and will likely never see again. Mr. Middle Management is finding out for the first time too. I slink back to my office and over the course of the next hour nearly all of the 20 people in the meeting come visit me to see what it was all about. I left at 11 AM to keep my cool. Single most unprofessional moment of my life. I went into anaphylaxis at work, both eyes swollen shut and I couldn't breathe. My boss didn't want to let me leave to go to the hospital, ranted that she had to cancel plans with her kid to cover my shift. When I called in sick the next day she exclaimed, "Ugh, why is this happening to me? Excuse me for almost dying?" In high school I worked at a fast food place where my manager was fired for stealing commercial sized bags of bacon. Each bag had at least 100 plus strips of bacon, and this lady was taking home one a week. She was also the same manager that made sure we paid for every little bit we ate from the store, and cited a bunch of people for taking home or eating food that was not paid for. I'm on a search for a new job right now. I just had a tech recruiter take my references, promising to only call those that weren't at my current company. That was yesterday. Came into work today and they had called my boss. WTF. Husband convinced me to get a tattoo with him at this little hole in the wall joint. Half of my tattoo peeled off a week later because it wasn't in deep enough. I went back and the guy said, "Yeah, I didn't think the gun felt right," and redid it, but fricked it up trying to trace over his lines. So for something like 5 years I had this really crappy tattoo on my arm until I got a really extensive cover up, and the very middle of that cover up tends to fade out quickly, so ideally I need to get it touched up every few years. But I'm worried that the issue is that the skin has already been tattooed like 5 times in the same place, and getting it touched up will eventually just make it unable to hold ink at all. I had a water heater replaced the other week, and this loser honks at me from his van and immediately gives me attitude. Says it's my responsibility to get him parking. My job is to install the water heater. You have to provide parking. Luckily a friend was parked right out front and moved for him. But this wasn't good enough. Can I fit my truck in there? Yep. But is there enough room to open the back and get my equipment? Yeah, it looks like it's big enough. And the dude just sits there like a lump on a log. Finally he says, "I just don't know if this is going to work and I'll lose it. Do you want me to parallel park your car for you too?" Dude, I'm paying you $800, so don't complain to me about parking, which is part of running your business. Be an adult and figure it out. I watched him sit there holding up traffic for 2 more minutes before he parked. What a little bee. Hired an attorney to represent me. Civil proceedings. He ended up billing me for going to court, and got them to postpone my case for a later date. At first I just thought he was buying time to make a better case. I later learned he was going to that same courthouse that day anyhow because he had a trial against him for malpractice and fraud against a previous client. I only found that out because I was investigating him after he did such a horrible job on my case. I went to a massage spa specifically for pain in my shoulders and neck, which I made clear when booking, and my male masseur spent half of the hour massaging my butt. When asking about it, he said everything was connected, i.e. spine etc, so he had to focus on that area first, which is understandable, but not for 30 minutes out of the hour-long massage that is supposed to be addressing neck and shoulder pain. It was the most uncomfortable I've felt, and I've had both male and female massage therapists before. I wanted to run out of the room. Head chef drops plate of Alfredo on floor. Plate breaks. Still good. With 2 hands, scoops the Flofredo onto another new plate. Sends it out. A total cougar of a special agent from the USG came into my office. I am a fairly high-ranking federal employee. Sat on my desk and chatted for a while. Everyone that walked by gawked as she was dressed provocatively and undid several buttons on her sheer blouse while chatting. After about 30 minutes, she started going off about women and black folks who work in my department, saying that the women are all W and the black folks only spoke Ebonics and that she can't believe the government would hire these people. She looked at me to agree and I only replied, "You know I can't comment on that." After that she looked disappointed and left. To this day, I don't know if she actually thought we could discuss that on the job in my very public office, or if she was setting up bait to catch anyone agreeing with her xenophobic and chauvinistic comments in the workplace. That definitely sounds like some kind of trap. I had a server pour me the worst Guinness stout I've ever seen. It had 3 inches of head, which I didn't even know was possible on a stout, which basically meant I had to tip the glass almost entirely horizontal to get any beer. When I asked for a spoon to get rid of some of the extra head, she bitched me out and told me people from Ireland told her she poured a great Guinness and to man up. The only reason she got a tip was because I didn't want to wait for change because we were running late for the Celtics game. My wife's cousin has what might be considered by some the best job in the world. She works for Guinness and goes around pubs in Ireland to ensure that they are filling the pints of Guinness correctly. I was interviewing a doctor for possible inclusion in our provider network and she started talking about a problem she was having with her butt sphincter. It had nothing to do with the topic at hand, at all. This gastroenterologist attending was teaching us about how to do a cardiac exam, but she confused the 4 basic heart valve sounds. Even all the med students knew this and we had to gently awkwardly correct her. Also a classmate doctor, born and raised in America and training at a prestigious institution, didn't know how to spell diarrhea. I'm still not sure if he knows how. Also resident was talking with a patient about why she needed to remove her gallbladder, before I could tell her that she had already had it removed, and the patient promptly told her she didn't have one. I felt so embarrassed for her. Also a med student classmate was asked a question and thought there were 2 livers. When asked where it was he pointed to the wrong side. This was as a 3rd year med student. Then he promptly lied and said he was a volunteer and ran out of the room, lol. He's a psych now so I feel a little better. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for